Okay. Well, here we are. It's now May 21st. We've weathered a little bit of a spring snowstorm, so I suspect we may have light attendance today as people are out putting their geraniums back out in their yard, out of their garage, and getting back into the warm weather. And there's also the PGA on in an excellent tournament. So, but the topic today of the effectiveness of the innovation ecosystem will bring us close to being wrapped up for the month. The intent today is to discuss the survey data, which I've circulated in the newsletter, but I'll bring it forward and walk you through.
You're doing good.
Each of three graphs. You all should have gotten it because it was embedded in the newsletter that made reference to today's webinar. If you didn't get it, let me know. But the graphs will be in the recording, which will be posted in YouTube, and you'll be informed of that as well. Let me look forward a little bit though, and give you sort of an early indication of where I think we're going to be going over the next couple of weeks as we get ready for summer. I mean, when summer hits, attendance will be light. Maybe we'll go to once a month, but even though we've got a relatively full June already scheduled. Next week is meant to be devoted to conclusions, and that is, we've really spent 2 months now on economic resilience. 1 month in general discussion, and then the month of April or May, reviewing the results of the survey that was conducted in April. So by now we ought to have a pretty good handle on what are the general concerns, problems, issues, and what might we want to be recommending, whether it be to us or to industry or to professions or to public services, because I want to be careful that we don't assume that everything we've been discussing is of government's responsibility or for government to fix. That's absolutely not the case. There's entrepreneurs, there's families, there's teachers. There are many people who participate in affecting economic resilience in the province. So I want us to be careful not to simply think that the solutions and the recommendations that we want to come forward with should be directed at government. However, that being said, and devoting next week to conclusions, I'd like to table recommendations at the end of the day without discussion. And that is, send them to me. There are a few others that are associated with what we're doing that would be prepared to help me review those recommendations. Because on the 4th of June, I've invited some people to respond or to reply to those recommendations. And I already have a confirmation from some of them. Now, those that have been invited, even though I just said it's not government's responsibility, I have asked government to participate in a review of those recommendations. Justin Reimer has said yes, the Deputy Minister of Economic Diversification. Laura Kilcrease said she's going to be on holidays, but likely Rolly Dykstra, which is the Business Development Manager for Alberta Innovates. I've also invited the Business Development Council, and I've also invited the Alberta Economic Developers. If any two of them cancel, we'll have to get another, and I can certainly draw on others in order to make sure we've got a panel of at least 3. But the intent on June 4th, and we'd start earlier, we'd start at 2 o'clock in order to accommodate the schedule of those that have been invited to sit on the panel and to respond to the recommendations. I've asked Barry if he would moderate that session. So instead of me hosting and moderating, I'll host and open it up, make reference to what we've been doing, and then let Barry carry it from there, with primary interest in getting the those who have been invited to tell us a little bit about their roles in economic resilience and economic development, and also what their views are on the recommendations that we've tabled. So that's where we're headed for the month of May. Any comments there before I get started with the review of the economic ecosystem data? Okay.
Sounds like a great plan, Perry.
Who said that? Mel?
I know it's Yogi.
Oh, thanks, Yogi. Well, we'll just have to see. I mean, Justin didn't blink an eye. I must say, I have never made an invitation to Justin. Barry knows of him. Many of you would know, and Western diversification does play a role in economic development in Western Canada, and Justin's rather keen. So he said yes immediately. There was no need to twist his arm or provide him with an incentive or call his boss. So if he's an indication of the interest that others we expect from others, then I think the fourth could be quite exciting. Okay, I'm going to share the screen. Can you see that? No, you can't see that.
Yes,
You can see that. Can you see it, Claire?
I can see it.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is where we started. The first session we had about economic resilience, I cited for those of you that weren't in attendance that economic resilience on a scale up to 5 continues to be weak at 2.68, but has shown significant improvement over the course of the last year. 49% of the respondents viewed the economy as not resilient. Only 30% saw it as somewhat or very resilient. When we asked what factors were the most sensitive measures of resilience, that is, what were they taking into consideration consciously or unconsciously when they make a rating or a statement that the province is or isn't resilient? Most are referring to something to do with jobs or corporate investment. As you see, 69% cited employment increasing or decreasing, or job creation or job losses, or corporate investment increasing or decreasing. Of less interest was market share, GDP, recruiting, not to say they weren't of value, but they were about half of the value that they would have attributed to these other measures. When we looked at economic resilience over time, that's the black line here, it appears closely correlated with the price of oil. And that's not surprising because in the comments and over again since 2015, references consistently made that in order for the province to become economically resilient, it needs to diversify off oil and gas, meaning it needs to reduce the dependency or the sensitivity of the economy to the volatility associated with oil and gas. That doesn't mean getting away from oil and gas. It means diversifying enough that fluctuation does not sabotage the overall economy. You can see in the last half year, a very dramatic rise. And as we'll see as we got later into the survey, this is primarily attributed to what's going on in Calgary and recovery in oil. Now, is that good news? Well, again, it shows how sensitive the province is to the price of oil across almost all industries. When we asked what was the appropriate role for government, and this is very important for those that think government is the be all and the end all and should be held responsible for the state of the economy, which I, for one, and I think many of you would agree, that's an overstatement, and it would be highly inappropriate to expect that government can or even should be the primary driver of what happens to the economy. In any case, the primary role was cited as formulating policies and employing incentives for encouraging small business innovation. Over and over again, the focus of this network has been on the relevance of small business in innovation and the contribution of small business to diversification. Also promoting entrepreneurship, again, for small business startups, and then high investing directly in research offering long-term job creation rather than immediate short-term. When we looked at the regions, as I stated earlier, we see that those that rate the province's economy as resilient, very or moderate, were highest in the Calgary region and lowest from the Edmonton region. Why? And that's what we get into last week when we looked at what people cited as the various sectors of the economy that were robust versus weak. I cite the percentage of those that responded with an interest in the various industries and professions and public services. So you can see the balance of respondents. The respondents aren't just from agriculture or energy or forestry or government. They're all over the place. High in agriculture, high in energy for sure, and 15% in manufacturing. We looked at and that 36% overall expressed an interest in some of these subsectors of industries, 29% of some of the professions, and 35% of public. So 29, 36, 35, a pretty good representation from industries, professions, and public services in the survey, which is quite balanced and also indicates the degree of diversity that already exists within the province. Someone might argue we already have a diversified economy. What's the problem? The problem is with the diversification that we have, we still are heavily reliant or heavily affected by the volatility of the price of oil. When we got down and looked at the overall sector representation, the overall province was weak, but balanced industries and public sector representation, with industries and professions most and public services least resilient. That is, when people were asked about the resilience of the overall province, if they were from energy, they were more optimistic, or in agriculture and construction, than in forestry. Now, the forestry item, as I indicated earlier, I think was poorly represented, so I probably shouldn't even be citing it here. When we looked at what professions were ranked highest, because professions and industries both came in rather high, 36% and 38% saying the province was resilient. Most were from communications and infotech, energy, agriculture, and construction, or the weak, health and environment. So it gives you some sense of which sectors are people from that view the province in the most positive light, even though it's weak. When we looked at the Calgary region, no surprise, it was the highest. 47% saw the province as resilient, 49% in the professions, but only 33% in public sector. And this indicates those with the highest ratings in those various sectors, for Calgary anyway. We looked at Edmonton, it was the weakest in terms of regional resilience. Public services were most highly represented in the Edmonton region, and also the least resilient, even though with industries being the most resilient. So the mix here is industries and professions were heavily represented in Calgary, whereas industries and public sector were heavily represented in Edmonton. It appears that public sector, wherever it's heavily represented, would pull down the overall view of resilience. So it's the mix or the balance between industries, professions, and public sector that I point to. And if there's any recommendation, it would be to take a look at what Calgary is doing, and for Edmonton to give thought to how does it reduce the impact of the heavy representation of public sector on its overall economy. When they talk about health city, and that is focusing on industry in the health sector, that would be a way to transfer some of that health experience and health expertise into industry, which should help lift overall resilience of the Edmonton economy. We didn't have strong representation. It was weak, but up in the upper portions of the province in terms of its representation. Tourism is high, manufacturing is high, agriculture is high in terms of representation of those who saw the province as resilient outside of Edmonton and Calgary. Next comes what today is really original. This is original information now that you haven't seen before other than in the newsletter. We made the statement: to achieve economic resilience or diversification, economies need an effective and continuously improving innovation ecosystem that supports the survival, growth, and retention of entrepreneurs and small and medium enterprises. Do you agree? 90% agreed. 89% in Edmonton, 93% in Calgary, and 100% other. A comment by way of example for those that rated it highest was, without innovation, there is no economic growth possible. A quote from an individual rating the ecosystem as important, as least important, simply noted that resilience can be achieved in other ways. And I can recall someone commenting that they didn't have They didn't believe that they had an ecosystem in their region yet, that there was no evidence of accelerators or incubators. So this has been consistent now since 2015. The relevance of an innovation ecosystem and its importance for diversification has always been rated up in the 90% area. So this validates why it's important to look at the innovation ecosystem when we want to talk about diversification and resilience. When we ask them then to rate the effectiveness of the innovation ecosystem, it's one thing to say it's important, it's another thing to rate it as whether it is effective or not. So please rate the effectiveness of your location's innovation ecosystem in supporting survival, growth, and retention. Calgary clearly is above neutral at 3.1, with 3 being neutral and 4 and 5 being effective to very effective. 45% rated the Calgary region's innovation ecosystem as effective. Only 23% or half rated Edmonton. Now, though many of you may be aware that Tech Edmonton has recently been closed down and pulled back by the University of Alberta, that may have had a bearing on this, but it's I'd have to look into the data, and I have put in some comments here derived from the survey in order to get some color as what it is that people are seeing in Edmonton that they're not seeing in Calgary, or stating it another way, what are they seeing in Calgary that they're not seeing in Edmonton? And one of the things that has been cited is the pooling of private capital. There's been a major move in the last 6 months among senior executives, some of formerly in the energy industry, to take a much stronger role in the development of the innovation ecosystem by pooling private capital and focusing very much on early stage enterprise. I might make another observation that recently people lobbying me or having talked to me have said, our problem is not entrepreneurship, our problem is the survival of entrepreneurship, that we have a very high ratio of entrepreneurs when compared with other jurisdictions. But the issue that we have is not the birthing of entrepreneurs, but their survival. And that's where the ecosystem comes in. The ecosystem is not just for giving birth. The ecosystem is there to see that enterprise through the valley of death to the point that it can stand on its own. When we ask what elements comprise, when we cite the elements that comprise the innovation ecosystem and then ask them to rate them, those that rate highest are resources and infrastructure. Infrastructure being the availability of the internet, good transportation and logistics, available research, advisory services through incubators and accelerators. The index was above 3, up at 3.58, and the rating of the effectiveness of their innovation ecosystem was 76% when they looked at infrastructure. And when they looked at resources, the availability of talent, financing, information, facilities, land, and technology, they rated that as relatively effective at 69%. But the 2 areas that were weakest are not areas that relate to spending, which is the buying and development of resources, the buying and development of infrastructure, but the human side of the operation of the ecosystem, and that is the availability of vision and leadership, a clear purpose and inspiration, rated 62%, index of 3.21, and the processes, the management processes of communications, decision-making, networking, organization, accountability. The type of thing, by the way, Ling, that you and I were talking about earlier is you can have a procurement system, but if you don't manage it well, then the availability of that system is irrelevant. The criticism is targeted then at the operations side. So we can have good resources and good infrastructure, but if we're not managing them well, then it's not the availability of the system that's the issue, it's how well we manage it. And I think that's an important point for all of us to take into consideration, that it's the human side of the innovation ecosystem, and maybe it's the human side as well of our economic resilience, and that is the commitment of individuals to resilience and to the development of resilience, as opposed to same old, and hoping that the status quo can return and will be working again. So that's the overall summary of what we learned in assessing the innovation ecosystem's importance, effectiveness, and contributors. So let's open it up for discussion. Any surprises there?
Well, Perry, I heard you verbalize a lot of great conclusions and recommendations from the data that you've presented here. I would put that all on slide 12.
Well, it will be in the recording, point one. Point two, I do remember much of what I have said because I've been saying it for 15 years, not taking it out of the top of my head, but the data reflects essentially what I'm providing to you. So I'd prefer not to personalize it, that Perry says. I think it's what the network has been saying. Albertans seem to be getting it right, that there are things that need to be done and that there are things a week. We need to keep on echoing that.
I agree with you on all that. I just think your audience would remember this better if they also saw it in addition to hearing you say it.
Okay, it's coming.
Okay.
Just to repeat the introduction of today's session, I expect next week to be drawing conclusions. And I hope all of you will provide me some input, and I'll be listening to what you have to say today, because this is meant to be the discussion part of this whole review. So what have we learned? What have we seen? What do we conclude? What are the problems? Because once we've got those conclusions cited, it's pretty easy then to link them to recommendations. So next week, I want to devote the 28th to a discussion on conclusions and a discussion of what we might cite as recommendations and table those recommendations so that on June 4th, Western Economic Diversification, Alberta Innovates, the Alberta Economic Developers, and the Business Council executives who will be given those recommendations will have an opportunity to tell us what their thoughts are, what the ones they might agree with, how they would supplement them, and what might already be underway in order to execute on them. So that's where we're headed. And I think what you suggested, Yogi, is exactly where we're headed today and tomorrow and right through into the 4th of June.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just jumped ahead.
Look, don't ever apologize for being progressive.
Denis here. I'd like to make a general comment, I think, about the importance of innovation and how it's important to make sure that you don't stifle it. Because that's once innovation has been blocked or prevented or is not happening, your entrepreneurs give up, they stop. I'll cite an example. An example is a friend of mine has a company here, electronic medical record company here, and he was approached by doctors at the Cross Cancer Institute. And they've been working for 6 months with Alberta Health Services, and things were like slowly moving along. He had secured some federal funding. They were about to start, and Alberta Health Services pulled the plug on their project. Now, those doctors, they're not going to try another project again. They're going to kind of say, well, been there, done that. It's no point. There's no use. And there are some elements especially related to government and healthcare. And healthcare really should be one of the areas where there's so much potential for innovation, but it's not happening in Alberta. Alberta Health Services has been blocking a lot of innovative projects, and basically the people on the front line have given up. And so it's devastating when, it's one thing to encourage innovation, but it's so harmful if you discourage innovation, because you're not going to get people coming to the table again.
I totally agree, Dennis. I running into this myself, and we develop products for autism clinical children intervention management. When we talk to the school teachers, school boards, and AHS frontline staff, everyone told us, I needed this yesterday. But when we try to go through the procurement process, even government education, school boards, they just don't move. I can give you an example. One of the school board told us, we love the products, but has to be zero effect on our balance sheet. What that means is give us for free.
So it's yeah, it turns people off. Your
Yeah.
innovators get tired, they get discouraged, they quit.
So I can share another one. So I talked to government. I'm a quite aggressive guy. So I went to the innovation people. I said, you guys not working together. You know, the people doing innovation say, well, I did my job. My job is getting the innovation start. Once they start, it's out of my hand. I'm done. So I think that's it's more like the leadership, top leadership issues. And I'll give you another example. In Canada, we have something called buy and sell, which is a federal government program. Every 6 months or so, they call it innovation demonstration project. So you can submit a proposal, say how great your innovation, then federal government can actually select which one to be selected, approve which one to be selected, which one's not. Once it's been selected, they automatically attach $500,000 for civilian innovation, $1 million for military related innovations, and then federal government will provide the funding. And you can go to anywhere in Canada, as long as it's a public institution, they can just pick it up, federal government pay for it, demonstrate usage, and usually, you know, people can actually get them off the ground. In Alberta, we have a very little chance to even win that kind of things. Every time you look at the federal government buy and sell, usually the big winners are either Ontario, Quebec, and I think if you take Ontario, Quebec, and BC, 90% of them goes there, right? So I think we may have to talk to Justin, talk to WD. We may have to do a WD version of this kind of things.
I'm biting my tongue because if we get started on this, I'll explode. I couldn't agree with you more, Dennis. I mean, I think if there is any one area that we could make an extraordinary progress in, it would be health. What I don't understand, well, I do understand, is why it is so difficult to get any progress on the innovation front when there's been so much promise. You might recall it was Ralph Klein who said he was going to overhaul and reform health. He failed, and he acknowledged as much. We have inside Alberta Healthcare officials now that claim that their mandate is innovation. Well, you want to sideline an initiative, hand it to one individual and say, you're now responsible, and everybody else can duck and say it's his problem. I mean, that's a classical way in which you can avoid systems responsibility by handing it off to a person and cornering them and saying it's their problem.
I can share with you how to make this happen.
John Jewishin on retirement had been in charge of innovation. He failed. Over and over and over again, people who came into healthcare to be innovation, to effect reform. Justin Reimer was one of them. He was appointed Deputy Minister of Health. He left. He didn't pull it off.
Yeah.
Premiers have failed. I
can tell you how to do that. I can.
It is healthcare is dominated as a socialist initiative. It is government operated. It is driven by issues of efficiency, not effectiveness. It's high volume. Professions dominate. There are many things about healthcare which are about status quo. If you talk to Health Canada and you ask Health Canada about innovation, they'll tell you their primary role is to protect you from innovation. We talk to them about cell therapy. Last thing in the world they want to hear about is anything that might have any possibility whatsoever of affecting an individual. Go ahead, Randy.
Once again, I feel like taking the dialogue to a higher level, because there are some systemic things happening throughout civilization. I mean, obviously, healthcare is one of the prime concerns of all humanity. And so you might expect to see some of the problems, systemic problems of civilization showing up there first, especially given the events over the last 15 months. But as I've said before, there is a compounded exponential growth of civil complexity, meaning that in order to get anything done in this world, there are more and more considerations that you have to think about and put into your plan of action. Everything's more complicated than it used to be. More
We
complex.
have entropy.
We have exactly civil entropy. And but I should clarify one mythology, because there are many people in the innovation world who believe that more innovation is always good. That's never been true. I mean, if you take that to the extreme, you have constant change and no ability to plan anything.
But why portray the extreme in order to make your argument? You're not arguing there should be no innovation. We're arguing primarily there should be some innovation, and we're getting none.
Yeah, but the right balance. But I think what is happening over long haul is that that there is an entropy, or sorry, inertia in organizations, because it just takes too long to get things done. There's too many steps. And I mean, you look at the red tape reduction kinds of efforts, they've been ongoing, but you know, in the long haul, they're always overwhelmed.
Okay, so what's the solution? I mean, with all respect, every one of us seems to be talking about the problem. Let's acknowledge the problem and let's talk about what we can do about it. Now, one of the things that the Kenney government had proposed before COVID, and then it went into a stall, was to increase competition in the system, to allow more private involvement and private enterprise to play a role in order to take advantage of the power of competition and personalization, and focusing the system, not on the system and on the supplier, but on the person that the system exists for, which is the individual. But that's been put in abeyance as a byproduct of all the attention being placed on COVID. So it would seem to me one of the recommendations one might make in order to get innovation, particularly innovation in the interest of the client come consumer, is to allow more choice at the consumer level, which means competition. How well is that going to go over in a regulated profession? How many Canadians want to see any degree of private involvement in healthcare? When I was director of privatization for the province, I said to the government, you do not need to do a thing in order to increase innovation. What is going to happen is the frustrated consumer who doesn't want to wait in line anymore is going to revolutionize and change the system. That's where the hope lies. Is waiting in line is not healthcare. That's from the Supreme Court of British Columbia. Is we have a system that is slowly breaking, and the levels of dissatisfaction are rising. But that's not going to come from government itself. Government will respond to what people want. And right now, the healthcare and the teachers dominate the voting system. They're the ones that are being listened to. Dennis?
Yeah, I would think as a solution, what I would see is that they should uncouple that small scale piloting innovation from the procurement process. Because in healthcare, that's what always happens. Somebody says there's a problem, well, they bump it up right away and say, well, it has to go through a procurement process. Well, they haven't even defined what they need. So everything gets stalled here. They should kind of say, well, you don't need to go through a same bureaucratic, heavy procurement process for innovating a pilot project. But that's what we were told to do. And that stifles the innovation, because usually innovation should happen spontaneously, ad hoc. Just there's a need, let's see if we can fix it, and from fixing it, then scale it. And once it's at that scaling stage, maybe there'll be a procurement process that we need to go through. But don't stifle innovation right from the get-go by saying, oh, well, we can't do this because we need to define what our need is so that we advertise it and then invite everybody to do it. They don't do it. And it's bass backwards.
Yeah. So I would suggest put a dedicated budget aside for using this, and also staple innovation as a part of a job performance into the top dogs in C-level people. And as soon as their performance have this measurement, you will see the jump.
Okay, may I say something here?
Go ahead, Lona.
Because there's a model that's in place already. It's in Calgary, and it has been fostering innovation in the oil field and environmental technology for at least 25 years. And the name of the organization is Canadian Environmental Technology Association of Canada, or Council of Canada, or something. It's an engineer by the name of Joe Lucas, who pioneered sulfur capture technology, which is now used around the world. And every year they have what's called a mini MBA in Banff, 4 days. And everybody from beginning entrepreneurs right up to people who've had their companies for years are paired with people who have succeeded in business and have gone through the hurdles at various stages of their business. And what I'd like to suggest is that through this group of people, they set up something similar for healthcare, because that seems to be a real concern to the group that's here today. And that would be a way of, sort of guiding these innovators and entrepreneurs through the various algorithms that are now available. What's the demand for this technology? It's just a transferability of that skill set. Financiers, managers, that like you spoke with Laurie Schultz, and making Alberta a leader in that area again, in this time in terms of health.
Well, I think it's also the supply and the demand issues. In oil and gas, it's relatively easy because you have a private capitals and the private interests. Even it's a large enterprise, if you show them a way to save money, help them, meet with the regulations, they, look at you, they actually try things. But healthcare system is very different though.
Yeah, but sometimes the line budget items, people approach organizations at the wrong time of the year. For example, budgets are determined, I don't know, given for a school year, beginning in September, they might be, the line items might be decided in November of the previous year. So, innovators have to learn when the costs are cycled and when those allocations are made. And I think that's part of the problem in healthcare.
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
Yeah, could I say something?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the organization that Alberta Health went with, but it's $1 billion organization in the States, and they have set up the structure for Alberta Health. And the reason that they selected this company was because it's safe. You go IBM if you've got any questions about what technology to go with. And I know Denise's story, and I live next door to my friend Mahadi Sayed for 8 years while he tried to create a software that would work effectively in the Alberta Health system. And he went to great lengths to find out what the specs are on each proposal, request, RSP, and everything like that. And he had an amazing product that he'd created, but it didn't matter. They just really, and they did some really unscrupulous things to undermine what he was trying to do. And I know Denise's product as well, and it's a great product, but there's no way to get through that system that they have there, which is governed by some very top-heavy management types. And if you go at that route to go and try and do anything with health, all we think now is watch out, don't go there, because it's just not going to happen.
I want to challenge your perspective at the end there. I noted that Justin Reimer was put in at the top to bring about change. He was a senior manager. I noted that Klein wanted to bring about change. He was a pretty senior position. So it would seem to me that we've got something more systemic in the health system than simply managers that are not committed to innovation. Because those managers that have been committed to innovation and to reform haven't been effective in bringing about a change in the system. So there's something more systemic. And I think it's the fact that health is overly regulated. It is highly conscious of issues of privacy. It is there to protect you. So you've got three factors right there that make innovation extremely difficult. Heavily regulated, we are here to protect you, and privacy. Now, which ones do you want to attack? You want to attack privacy? They had a panel that worked for 3 years to try and figure out how to make data available to people who are committed to innovation. They were ineffective. At the regulatory level, you've got the federal government, you've got unions, you've got professions that are committed to status quo. You are going to have to realize that this is a major revolution in order to bring about change in healthcare in Canada, the way Canada is currently structured.
Yeah.
Oh, I agree
Maybe-
with you totally.
Yeah.
You know,
Go ahead, Denny. Denny, you're in the system. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe to, close the discussion on healthcare, so I think you guys will probably like to discuss other things. But yeah, Tom's totally right. The case I mentioned earlier was Mahadi.
Yep.
Mahadi got another no yesterday. So, but anyways, maybe Perry, you be able to have a good frank discussion with Justin, because I won't be able to. I've had to, discuss it as as
I
an
can bring
entrepreneur.
Alex McPherson was formerly a deputy minister of health.
Yeah, and Alex, I've had good discussions with him as well. He's a bit frustrated with things too, but with Justin, you may be able to find out what he identifies as the real issues and why he left. And maybe, and those aren't things you won't share with me in particular, or with Mahadi, with others who are in healthcare, but he might be able to have that discussion with you, and that might lead to some solutions. And with that, because we could talk about healthcare all day, but with that, maybe.
But I don't mind talking about it all day, because it is symptomatic of when innovation is stymied, when you can't move ahead, when entrepreneurial initiative is not prime, when the supplier issues dominate, not consumer issues.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, because in healthcare, we see patients want it, frontline workers want it, people are thinking of dreaming up of solutions, and but when it gets bumped up the chain, somebody at the top has a kill switch and says, no, you can't do that, because you don't want to risk anything. Privacy issues, you have to maintain outcomes, it's whatever reasons, but it gets bumped up somewhere with somebody with a kill switch. And but everybody at the front line agrees that we need to do it, but they get discouraged and they stop dreaming up solutions. They say, what's the point?
Hey, Denis, what is the name of that organization that actually runs Alberta Health out of the States? It's out of
the company's called Epic, and they've rolled out Connect Care in Alberta. So everything you try to do something, and the answer is, well, Connect Care is going to fix that one day.
Yeah.
That's all they say. Well, we're not going to do this because Connect Care is going to fix it one day. That's always the answer. And I'm not sure if there may be some.
Let's take a positive in health.
Okay, good.
Let's take some innovation that is underway. Let's look at what Randy Duguay is doing by way of example. Now, what Randy has developed a wearable, and he doesn't call it necessarily a wearable, but it has the capacity to gather information that only a doctor would have had access to before. Only the system would have had access to before, and the system would have kept it. You wouldn't even know it. So in his wearable, you as an individual now become a manager of your healthcare, at least a manager of the data, and you can decide who to share that data with as your aid. This is transforming the system from being supplier driven to being client centric. So there are things going on that technology is addressing out of frustration. The human operated system is top heavy. It's supply driven, not consumer driven. Now, that is not unique to healthcare. The public service in Canada, only about 100, and as such, has been driven by principles of supply. We are building a system and we build it from the top up. And when we're done building it, we'll turn it around so that it will be responsible to the very individuals for which it was built, the student and the client. The revolution is now a little overdue. The system has become overbuilt and so focused on protecting suppliers, protecting the union, that the amount of power that exists among the supplier over even who gets elected in a government is considerable. So that the change is going to happen, it seems to me, not by a frontal attack and attacking healthcare as it is, but literally doing an end run on it and focusing on the client. And stuff like what Randy is doing, where we're talking about, and what Michelle is doing by providing nutrition individual to, and doctors who are deciding to bail out of the system and take their knowledge and find ways to render it, even in a heavily regulated world, to their clients. That's competition, and that's alternative. That's alternatives. I don't know of any other way. I do not. In talking to Justin and talking to Alex and having worked in the system myself for 12 years, you're not going to bring about change in healthcare from the top up or by affecting change internally. Yeah. Even ministers haven't been able to do it. So you got to do an end run, and that is build a constituency. Build a constituency of individuals who are thrilled with the quality of care that they're getting from other sources of supply, even if it means going to the States. Okay. I comment, Denny.
Well, yeah, that's where we've done. We're going to the States now. Right. We've got people using it and people telling others to use it.
Right.
So it's totally a different ecosystem for sure over there.
But that is.
Excuse me for a second. Denny, is this the same software I looked at with you 3 or 4 years ago, where you were streamlining the process for nailing down a specialist? Is that the idea? Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's where the revolution will occur, is by a higher quality of service being delivered by an alternative supply system.
Yeah.
And that's bottom up. That's not top down. I think all that we've talked about is how do we get at sources of power and bring about change of the Titanic. It's not going to happen from the top.
Mm.
That's my wisdom.
Perry, if I could just put a case in point, with the health system right now. I just came across a story the other day where this is my nephew, and he works in one of the sort of areas outside of the city. There's Sherwood Park and so on and so on. And they have ambulance systems working out of those areas. And Alberta Health, in their wisdom, have centralized their ambulance system. So what's happening is, he says, he'll get a call and he'll say, oh, they want you in Mill Woods or in South Edmonton somewhere. Meanwhile, he's from this outlying area, and they will literally pass people as the requests come in, going out to his area while he's heading into the city area. So it's just total chaos with this ambulance system right now. Now, if somebody come in and say, okay, I can answer this, I can have a technology that will fix all of that and make it possible for everybody to, get the ambulances from the nearest convenient place. But that's not happening from what I hear.
Right. So just one more symptom.
Yeah.
The problem. The healthcare system, as it has been constructed and as it exists today, is resistant to innovation. Yeah. I just sent a note to Peter Fenwick. Peter Fenwick worked in Alberta Health, and he was brought in because he had private sector background. He was let go. He then went to Ontario, and in Ontario, they wanted to drive innovation. He was let go. Peter is a brilliant individual, very, very experienced. So he went to Airdrie, and in Airdrie, they tried to develop a district health supply or health service as a pilot within Airdrie, that people could be given an alternative. It was working very well, but then health stepped in.
Yeah,
was-
yeah.
Question,
It's
do
really
we
bad.
have a good example of an innovative healthcare ecosystem in Canada?
No,
Well, we do. I think we do. If you could contact Mahadi Sayed, his last name is, and he's got a very extensive health management tool.
but no, he's asking of a place.
Like
that
a
is
provincial,
managing Healthcare.
uh,
okay. No, oh, sorry, I missed that.
provincial or regional
No,
health innovation ecosystem?
no, health is regulated at the federal level. I mean, it's a federal system. The financing comes-
Provincial, isn't it?
and
The deliveries.
federally regulated. I forget the guy.
Yeah, it's federally regulated and provincially,
Managed.
yeah, managed, that's
Right.
right. So.
Provincially delivered.
provincially-
Yeah, and federally regulated.
Right.
I think Perry, you summed it up earlier, and that is, unless we can get a change in the average Canadian voter's attitude towards healthcare
Right.
and how it's administered, we're just spinning wheels.
Right. Right. It's going to have to come from the bottom. I mean,
So-
this system is very top heavy.
Yeah.
Everybody
So-
knows where the power lies. It lies at the top. The unions, the people who are in the unions, the people that vote for the governments. This is a regulated system. Privacy, regulation, and protection.
Well, is it then
it's all-
inherently conservative by nature because it involves protection of human life?
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
the culture or the values of conservatism run throughout the whole infrastructure.
I'll give you a perfect example, Randall. A few years ago, when I was executive with the Alberta Council of Technologies, the focus for a year was on cell therapy, personalized medicine, where the stem cells within your body have the capability of reproducing what produced you in the first place. And there's been a lot of promise and a lot of hope and a lot of expectations that degenerative diseases could in fact be mediated, could in fact be ameliorated with stem cells. A lot of promise, a lot of hope, a lot of hype. And so we spent a year from the lab to the bedside. How long would it take and what were the impediments in order to bring cell therapy, which was being used in treatment of leukemia, being used in a number of effective ways already. And so this created a lot of excitement for people who had loved ones with Alzheimer's or people who were suffering with Parkinson's. And I can recall one of the sessions we had many in Calgary, we had many in Edmonton, and we brought out large numbers of people because this was an aging the people that came out were part of the aging population and some of the people who were affected. And at one point, the panel that was discussing the promise and the hope and what were the barriers, someone stood up in the room, said, never going to happen. Not in my lifetime. I'm from Health Canada, and we will protect you from this technology. And there were women and men in the room that said, look, I'm prepared to sacrifice my life so that my children and those in the future can benefit from what might be an experiment with me. There's no way. We will protect you from technology. And that was pretty well the end of the discussion because Canada Health is protecting us.
How many years ago was that, Perry?
It could have been yesterday for that matter.
No, I don't think so. I think things are really so different now. They're just incredibly different. And the feds, certainly they have a big influence. But in the schemes that are happening out there now, they're happening so fast, the changes. Like
Really?
just a few years ago,
Okay,
the idea of another doctor being able to assess, bring in the latest tests on me, that was just thought, oh no, that's not going to happen. We can't have that happen. Now it happens all the time. I can walk into another doctor and I can get I can get all the he can get all the details on me. He can see the MRI. He can see the medications I'm taking, everything. And then
Tom, hold on.
a few years ago,
Tom,
that was
wait,
just anathema.
Tom, wait. Where
yeah.
have you been for the last half hour? We've been discussing the system's resistance to change, and now you're bringing forth the very examples that we're looking for. God bless you. Tell us how these innovations have been taking place and where you're finding them.
My
In fact,
recent
I'm in
experience.
everyday hospital.
Yeah,
Denny,
my recent experience has been the federal government has been actually helpful, but they, in Mahadi's example that I cited earlier, he went and got some federal funding and he brought it to Alberta to do a project with the cross cancer. And Alberta Health says, no, we're not interested. It wouldn't have cost Alberta Health Services a penny, but they refused, even though we still had the federal money to be able to undertake a project. So
Okay.
I think the federal government is trying to find ways, but because healthcare is provincially administrated, that's where the turf protection is happening.
Okay,
And
so
we're very resistant stuff coming from the federal government now.
are we getting clarity then? Because I talked about protection, regulation, and privacy. On the regulation side, the federal government is open to innovation.
Yes, yes,
Alberta,
they have they started an agency called Can Health about 2 years ago, which has been trying to help healthcare startups match with different health agencies and bypass the procurement process and just get them to do a project. Just proof of concept, do something, make it work.
So is
And
Alberta?
if it fails, in Alberta, nothing's been happening in Alberta with Can Health. They just
so
they're
this
not
is
doing it.
this is clarity. This is what we're looking for, some clarity. Thank you, Tom.
And if there is a jurisdiction, Mahadi, we mentioned Mahadi a number of times. He's had some interesting projects in Manitoba, and he finds that as much resistance we find in Alberta, he finds they're much more open and trying things in Manitoba.
Well, a couple of deputy ministers on leaving Alberta went to Manitoba.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah,
But
that's
I think that there's, I'm going to add something to what Randall mentioned, and that's the culture that we're in. And I think that as the baby boomers are getting older, you hopefully will see some sort of change in culture, because yes, we are administrative heavy, but we are also a culture that is afraid of death. And when I was in Taiwan, I taught with a young man whose father was kept alive in undue circumstances in a terrible condition because the doctors were death averse, because there are statistics kept of doctors who lose patients. And I think we need a kind of cultural shift so that we're not afraid of death and sort of, let's say, what's the point of living to be 150 years old? And I'm like those people that Perry mentioned. I'm willing to sacrifice my own health so that my grandchildren can get the health care that they need, because as it is unsustainable. And I look at the demographic of the people involved in this conversation this afternoon, and Shirley and I are the two women, and look at the aversion that the doctors have to midwives. Women have been giving birth for centuries. It is not a medical problem in a normal situation. Why isn't the healthcare system embracing midwives as a way of cutting costs? We have to become a little bit more holistic, I think. That's my two cents.
There's a problem that goes back 50 years for me. I don't know. Midwives. Yeah.
So just I was a consulting for Alberta Health for many, many years. So everything you talk
There's
about,
the problem, eh?
I'm no longer there. But Dennis and Perry, the things you want to know answers, I'm not going to say in the recording session, but we definitely can have a private discussion.
I want to pick up though on a comment that Alona made, because I did write about this a few weeks ago, and that was this principle that we have in Canada. and maybe right here, that we are all in pursuit of everlasting life.
It's wrong. Yeah. It's
No,
crazy.
but the system operates as if that is dear to our hearts. Now, I've had some personal experience before 10,000 people, 10,000 in public speaking about the role of emerging technologies. I typically would review what stem cells may well do, what fusion may well do, what electrifying transportation, all of these forces and sources of technological change. And I said, some of the most dramatic are in the healthcare realm. That we've increased the lifespan of individuals so extensively that we're not even sure we can handle the welfare costs for an aging population when we haven't moved the age of retirement. And so I said to the audience, I said, I'm really curious, and I've been curious to ask you all this question, and I'll ask you this question right now, that if you were to be granted everlasting life, how many of you would opt for it? Only like 8 people out of that 10,000 ever raised their hand. Most people don't want everlasting life, at least that was the point that was being made. So I said, now I'm confused. I've just granted you the gift of life, probably the most precious thing you've ever had as a gift for you. Let me try it another way. How many of you would opt for another day? Not everybody raises their hand.
Yeah.
I said, now I'm really confused. I gave you an infinite amount of something that you value and you don't want it, but I've given you a finite amount of it and you do want it. Now, maybe it's, you think you're going to look like you're 1,000 years older, and that turned out not to be the case. So I said, if you were to opt for a certain number of years, how many years would you likely opt for? And the average tended to be around 100. Well, isn't that interesting that biology somehow is hitting exactly the mark? And the conclusion was that what life really is all about is experiences. And there's only so many experiences that we really want to have in this existential life. And then enough is enough. But the system doesn't operate this way. The system operates like for a voter. As long as you are voting, and I am promising you I'm going to take care of you, you'll continue to give me your vote, and I will continue to redistribute money in the system in order to make sure you are comfortable that I am taking care of you. Everlasting life that the system seems to be operating on this illusion. And in fact, the problems which we're facing, and Demi, you may want to comment here, I don't know if he's still with us, the costs in the system, because we are allowing, and we have built a system to take care of you till you're 85, 90, 100 years old. We didn't have Alzheimer's. We didn't have Parkinson's. We didn't have many of the diseases we have, which are associated with old age.
Exactly.
We had them.
We have built a system that is actually creating many of the problems today we're trying to solve.
We had them, I think, Perry, but we didn't really coordinate or organize them the way that they have now, which is really very, very thorough and still confusing as hell. I like Mozart saying, that death gives life meaning. And I think that's true, but a lot of us are more intent on just living another day,
Well, I think the point we're trying to make is that somehow or another the system has gotten out of hand. And I mean, Bill Gates may be right, maybe he's wrong. He's certainly got a lot of attention by saying the world as a whole seems to have got caught up in growth and population and everlasting life and all of these principles, and that governments are following along and the voters are following along. So you talk about a culture, I thought COVID may shock people. COVID did exactly what it is we think should be done. It purges the vulnerable. It purges the elderly. It takes out of the system those which are weak.
Which is what nature did along.
Well, but mankind stepped in, and mankind said, we can do better. We can extend your life. We can make it less painful, and on. And now we're sitting here and saying we're not happy with what the system has done for us.
But
are we hypocrites?
Yes, we are.
These are all really great comments, Perry, and it's just, you did a really good summary there of the whole a lot of the issues and everything that are going down. I'm just amazed by this whole COVID-19 thing about how quickly the medical system, the scientific scientists and whatnot have come up with a solution. You know, this is not 15 months ago. They came up with that 6 months ago.
Yeah, but
And they got it all distributed, and it's amazing. It's an amazing medical achievement.
The RNA technology has been around for a while.
Yeah, it has, yeah.
It was wonderful that technology was on the shelf and could be drawn to the surface as quickly as it was. So it's not like they were starting from scratch.
It's also not over yet, because normally if they had more time, they would have taken a couple of years to see what long-term effects the vaccine has.
Yeah.
We don't know what happens to people with the vaccines in them after 2 or 3 years or more.
Yeah.
Well, if we take the conversation the last 15 minutes, maybe the blessing is yet in front of us and they can clear out a lot of the vulnerable in the weak. But then it takes, I think there was a guy named Hitler who had some thoughts along these lines too. So
Yeah.
let's be a little bit circumspect as to how the heck you would reform and restore a more humanistic system, because this isn't humanism. This is not what humanism was meant to be, is living till you're 120, becoming as dependent as you are.
And, you know, I just want to say one very quick thing. A lot of my friends are younger than I am, but one of my neighbors had a discussion with her doctor the other day. And one of the fastest growing organizations in Canada is Dying with Dignity.
Right.
I know this is a slippery slope. I'm not going to open that. However, this particular woman had a conversation with her doctor, and the doctor said to her name, to N, she said, "You would not believe the number of people that I've had this conversation with." So, you know, there it is for what it is.
Hey, I'm going to make an observation here that in a way summarizes much of what we've been talking about for the last 2 months. Has government gotten involved in too much?
Yes.
Are we regulating too much? Has government become so big that every aspect of our lives and every aspect of our economy, we somehow turn to government and allow them to tax us? And we've lost sort of a natural flow, ebb and flow of evolution, ebb and flow of innovation, because somehow or another we need to go to government in order to get clearance for everything. Is there, I remember when our current MP in St. Albert knocked on my door one day and wanted my vote and going to Ottawa. I said, "You got my vote if you do one thing, do less. See if you can take some government out of our lives." That's not what he got voted for. I remember talking to Linda Duncan, a Liberal MP. And I raised the same point. She said, "You don't get it, do you? I got elected to make government do good things for you." I thought, wow, we have built a monster.
Oh,
But there's a problem, though, that we have, that the collective intelligence required to manage a complex civilization is growing, and each of us individually have a diminishing portion of all the knowledge available. Even a regular MD today has difficulty keeping up with the latest research and development on all the pharmaceuticals and so on, and discoveries. So how does any individual or any organization manage the vast warehouses of knowledge out there in a meaningful way so that we can take intelligent action? So there is a role for government, and I think it has been growing in spite of possible, the thing that, politicians always want to expand their domains. That's another element. But I believe that because of the complexity, we've had to have governments become more bigger and complex to manage the complexity of civilization. The other way to do this, though, is to simplify our knowledge base and use some very sophisticated disciplines like systems theory and cybernetics to understand the way the world really works, and not through the legacy disciplines that we've been sort of saddled with from the last 150 years.
Well, I think that the organizational change that we see underway today is anyone who claims that they are a bastion of knowledge is in competition with AI. You're right. No human being and no organization that I know of can handle the rate of knowledge change. And so technology enters into that realm as well and says, look at, we're now building chips that are the thickness of an atom. The capacity of the human being to compete with what and manage its frustrations is leading us into looking for something else and looking for an alternative. And
Well,
that,
what people
that
have,
takes us into the digital economy.
yeah, what people have always done is to band together to create collective intelligence where the individual intelligence is not sufficient. And then, of course, we have diversity among us. We inherit different brain profiles that make us stronger as a group when we create synergy. This is all good, but we were designed to live in a small community out in the woods with a limited amount of variety.
My wife and I had a conversation just a week ago, very similar to this one, Randall. We said, wasn't life simpler when we knew much less? Wasn't life simpler? Could we go back, get rid of the newspaper, get rid of the radio, get rid of the internet, get rid of the galaxies, and just go back to the simple life of a little bit of gardening, back and forth to the sea? It sounds like retirement.
Perry, you're taking us right back to my favorite, and I've talked to you people a number of times about it. Until we learn to trust, we cannot solve the problems of our society today. And that's the global challenge. Or else we will go back to your simple society. And it won't be me or probably you, but it'll be our grandkids or great grandkids that end up there because we haven't grown up and learned how to trust each other and trust the people that have the knowledge, because the computer between our ears is just not able to take in all the knowledge that's available and the rate of change. And until we do, and again, Davos and the economic leaders in the world understood that, because that was their core issue that they were addressing this last year when they met.
And what did they conclude?
You know, I haven't heard they concluded anything.
Yeah.
They may have, but I haven't heard it.
But you associated the word with the word trust. I'll come back to you in a second, Bud. You related trust to those who know, and we need to reestablish trust in those who know. Who knows? Who is this? Is it a who? Is it a what? Is it a where? Where is this body, this location? Because this takes us right back to faith. If you really want to get into a high level discussion on another glass of scotch, is when you lose trust in knowledge, what do you have left? You've only got faith. And it's conceivable that this period that we've been into, which has lasted a couple of 100 years, may be only a phase in the evolution of mankind, and that we have placed too much trust in knowledge and in the institutions that proclaim to know. Go ahead, Bud.
Problem is the majority of a human population is untrustworthy. So there you
That's
go.
the problem. Yeah, that's the problem. How do we?
But I don't think we're talking about trust between individuals. We're talking trust in institutions, or trust in professions, or trust in companies, or trust in Apple, or
It's all
trust
the same here.
Pardon me?
People, those institutions are run by people who are untrustworthy. So therefore, the institutions become untrustworthy.
But
It takes on the personality of those people that lead it. You see it every day in business. You have great leaders, have great companies.
So you make a judgment as an individual in who to trust.
Right. And I found that I usually fail about 70% of the time.
Oh, and yet you do go to the supermarket and buy your food, and you do drive on the roads, and you do go to your doctor, and you do turn on your electricity. I mean, there are many things that you have faith in that you believe know and are reliable.
No, they're on a spectrum. So I do an analysis of is it safe to drive on this road? And I say, well, you know what? I'm thinking about 1 in 1,000 idiots out there, and I can probably avoid them today.
Do you pay taxes? Do you pay
That's my 2 cents.
but you pay taxes. You probably do vote.
It'll take my home away from me if I don't.
The trust, though, the trust is something that is part of our human nature. But again, it was designed to work basically in small groups where we got to know people routinely, using all of the body language clues, face to face, and a lot of people are just pulled back from that today. And if you go to a workplace, you don't bring your whole self to that workplace. You bring your specialized set of knowledge and skills. You plug yourself in. That's why so many people don't feel that the work is meaningful. You get in, you get the job done, you pinch your nose and you get out. So the whole society has kind of forgotten what an authentic, organic, trusting relationship even looks like. How does it feel? How to find it? How to build it? I think there's a general decay of these kinds of authentic relationships.
No, it takes us into a very interesting sidebar discussion on who to trust. Are you saying goodbye, bud, or you got a comment there?
No, I'm going to ask Randall, do you really believe that the lack of trust in humanity didn't exist 1,000 years ago?
Well,
we didn't trust strangers. To your point, we had a very small world and we knew who we could trust and when we could trust them, because scenarios change whether I trust somebody or not. Okay. I'll trust
Totally.
Perry to buy him a beer, but I won't trust him to lend him $1,000. So,
but he trusts me to
we
borrow
got-
$1,000, so borrow $1,000.
but we haven't changed. We were
even
the same 1,000 years ago.
Sure. Even single-celled organisms are able to detect whether something is good for them or bad. Nutrient or toxin, and it's approach avoidance kind of thing, just played out on a new level here. We distrust people if they don't give us the right facial signals when we're talking to them, and we would trust them if they did. That has never changed. But I think there's also a greater background anxiety that we feel just because of the uncertainty around us. There's so many people who interact with us and on whom we depend, but we don't know how much we can trust them. The uncertainty is there. So we go out now in all of our relationships being very, very, very cautious.
You might call that cynical.
Well, I am concerned.
No, Randall, I would really agree with you, that we go out, like I go out and get groceries. I'm very confined here right now, and I go out and get groceries. I don't get any interaction with almost everybody I confront going to the superstore. And then I come home and my wife says, oh, did anything interesting happening? And I say, not a thing. It was me going in, getting groceries, coming out, and putting them in my car. There's no familiar faces. There's nothing there, so it's sad. It's a world, hopefully after this COVID thing, we can try and find ways of rebuilding.
McKinsey recently released a report. I'll cite it in the newsletter next issue, on the trends, the global trends, some of the big stuff that's really happening on a global scale. And one of them is urbanization. The percentage of people today that live in an urban environment versus a rural is massive. And that leads to this alienation. Even though you're living in a more densified environment, you feel somewhat more alienated than you did when you were living in the rural environment, where your family and your local community were your basic relationships. But in an urban environment, you become one in a very dense environment. It's less human. And it's conceivable that mankind today is experiencing with the internet, because the internet is in fact with the galaxies and access to all these contacts and the networks that we build.
Any information you want, yeah.
We're overloaded with relationships, and none of them are profound. They're all rather superficial.
Yes.
And so none of them are really built for trust. They're built to be able to touch and feel and experience a gazillion things at once, but none of them have the profound, or as profound, or are we as dependent as we once were?
Well, a lot of our relationships really are strictly economical. And when I say economical, I mean monetary. We're not even measuring those intangible factors among us. So again, that old story about what gets measured gets done.
I'm going to wrap this up in one more minute, and maybe it's because of the scotch, but something just came to mind, and maybe it's a good note to wrap it up on. I think mankind has become lost. I think this belief that somehow we're all going to be happy, that if government would only satisfy our material needs and offer us protection and regulate safety and make sure that we could protect our privacy, I think we've gotten lost. I don't think we know where to place trust. I'm not sure we know what is the purpose. I'm not sure that jobs are as meaningful as they once were. It seems to me that what we're echoing in this discussion, and it is relevant to the economy, is I'm not sure we know where we want to go anymore. Once you've gotten there and the material gain is present, are we happy? Are we satisfied? Is this what it was really all about?
Healthy. Yeah.
Okay. I'm looking for some conclusions. This has been an awesome discussion. I'm not how to capture it when we meet with the Justin Reimer and those in government, other than say, we've got one resolution, we're all for anarchy.
Or for trust, or for trust.
Well, anarchy in an extreme form is that we don't need to trust government. We trust everyone, that no one will do any damage to us. We as human beings, we're just going to get along fine without the institutions and the professions. And I'm not quite sure that everybody would agree or disagree. But in the absence of regulation, in the absence of privacy, all these institutions and professions that are promising to do so much good for us that we've begun to lose trust in, does that mean that our trust is only in ourselves or in one another and the things we can feel and touch and know? Where do we place our faith?
The trust breaks down more when the problem is that we feel dependent on government and others.
Oh, they like that. They like that.
Well, but where the fear factor is increased because of we don't have as much control over our lives as we want.
I think that the point that Barry made is that trust has been associated with points of knowledge. And I think I think therein lies something really deep, because so much of what has taken place in the last 300 or 400 years is the breaking of faith in the competition with knowledge. And when God said to Adam and Eve, in their pursuit of knowledge, you'll be back. I'm really wondering.
Most of us ex-hippies, we grew up with, God is dead, right? So, it's very hard to lose that sort of framework as you move on in the world. But I agree with you totally that the society is feeling lost right now. And this sends me into despair when I think about it. And it's very hard to get away from the depression that goes along with it, because you think, how do I resolve this? How do I?
Tom, flip it. I mean, Shirley and I have this discussion frequently. If this discussion takes you in a negative space, turn it around. This could be illuminating. This could be exactly what we really need, is to have that questioning of this faith in knowledge and ask ourselves whether or not it's been misplaced. We put too much trust in institutions and individuals and governments that all say, I know what is best for you. I think that's where I think we have become lost in putting so much trust in the institutions that claim to know and will do things for us. And
Yeah,
we've lost
I
this
agree.
self-reliance of individual identity, of the meaning of life.
Mhm.
All right.
On that note,
It's
thank you,
43,
Perry.
isn't it?
Good night, everybody. Good night, everybody. Thank you for a wonderful discussion.
It
Hey,
was,
everybody. It's great.
Bye-bye.
good night.
Thank you.
Check out Perry.
I got bread in the oven. Goodbye.
Bye.